The morning air was thick with tension as people filled the courthouse. It wasn't just any day. Today was the trial of a police officer accused of using excessive force against a man who had done nothing wrong. Outside, cameras and reporters lined the steps, capturing the story that had captured the city for weeks. Inside, the atmosphere was different. It was quieter yet heavier. The air smelled faintly of polished wood and old paper, but it carried an undercurrent of fear and anticipation. Judge Freeman entered the courtroom with quiet authority. Her steps were measured, her posture straight, and her face calm, showing nothing of the storm that had been brewing outside the doors. People in the courtroom watched her with a mix of respect and relief. She had earned a reputation for fairness, patience, and courage, and today, those qualities would be tested more than ever. The defendant, Officer Dalton, sat at the front with a stern look. He had been a police officer for over a decade, known in some circles as competent and reliable, but his record told a different story. Complaints of racial profiling and aggressive behavior had been filed against him for years. Many had wondered why he had never been disciplined more harshly. Now he faced the consequences of those years of questionable decisions. The prosecution began presenting their case. They laid out detailed accounts of the night in question, when Dalton had stopped an innocent man for no clear reason and escalated the situation unnecessarily. Witnesses testified, each story adding more weight to the argument that Dalton had acted recklessly and with bias. Evidence was shown, body cam footage, photos, and reports that painted a picture of a man who had allowed prejudice to guide his actions. The defense tried to counter, speaking in measured tones, pointing out technicalities and questioning witnesses' memories. But the room seemed to hang on every word from the prosecution. Each fact, each story painted Dalton in a more negative light. The tension built with every passing moment, not just for the people in the courtroom, but for everyone watching the trial unfold on screens across the city. Judge Freeman listened carefully to each argument, taking notes, asking questions when necessary. Her calm presence provided a steadying influence on the room. The jury watched her closely, taking cues from her demeanor, absorbing her seriousness. Outside, onlookers wondered if justice would be served, or if the system that had failed so many times before would fail again today. As the trial progressed, Dalton's behavior began to show cracks. He muttered under his breath, sighed loudly, and occasionally shot angry glances at the witnesses. The courtroom officers kept a careful watch, sensing the rising tension. Judge Freeman remained composed, her eyes steady, her voice even. It was a quiet battle of wills, one that required patience and control on her part. At one point, a witness recounted the fear and confusion they had felt during Dalton's stop. Their voice shook as they described how powerless they had felt, how quickly a simple encounter could turn dangerous. The jury listened intently, some nodding, others leaning forward. Every detail seemed to make Dalton smaller in the room, less in control and more exposed. Throughout it all, Judge Freeman maintained order. She reminded attorneys to speak respectfully, to focus on the facts, and to allow the jury to hear everything without interruption. Her voice, calm and clear, carried authority without anger. It was this combination of firmness and composure that kept the courtroom from descending into chaos even as emotions ran high. Outside the court, reporters scribbled notes frantically. Social media posts poured in, with people discussing every aspect of the case. Some supported Dalton, claiming he had been misunderstood or treated unfairly. Others condemned him, seeing the trial as long overdue accountability for a system that often ignored misconduct. The city was divided, and every eye was on the courtroom to see what would happen next. Inside, the tension reached a boiling point as the day wore on. Dalton became increasingly agitated, tapping his pen, fidgeting, and occasionally muttering to himself. Security personnel moved closer, sensing that his frustration could lead to action. Judge Freeman noticed the subtle changes, the way his eyes darted, the way his hands clenched. She remained calm, but internally she calculated, prepared for any situation. The courtroom drama was not just about one man's actions, but about the larger issues it represented. Trust in law enforcement, fairness in the legal system, and the fight against prejudice. Everyone present understood that this trial was bigger than a single incident. It was a reflection of society's struggle to hold power accountable, and the stakes were enormous. Hours passed and the courtroom rhythm continued. Witness after witness, piece after piece of evidence. The tension never eased. Judge Freeman's presence anchored the room, yet the undercurrent of fear was palpable. Every person in the courtroom could feel it, a mix of anticipation and dread, wondering what might happen if Dalton's temper finally reached a breaking point. Then came a quiet moment, almost unnoticeable at first. Dalton shifted in his seat, his gaze fixed on Judge Freeman. A small murmur passed through the spectators, sensing something unusual in his focus. Security officers exchanged brief glances but did not yet move. Judge Freeman noticed too, but she did not panic. Instead, she adjusted her position slightly, preparing herself mentally for what could come. It was a moment that seemed insignificant to some, but to those paying attention, it was the first sign of a dramatic turn that would change the course of the trial. The tension had reached its peak, and everyone in the room could sense that the ordinary rhythm of court proceedings was about to be interrupted. The day had been long, emotions had run high, and the city watched with bated breath, unaware of the shocking events about to unfold. Judge Freeman continued to listen, ask questions, and keep the proceedings moving. She had faced challenges before, but nothing like what was coming. The trial was no longer just about facts and evidence. It had become a test of courage, patience, and control. Every eye in the courtroom, every ear tuned to the proceedings, awaited the next moment, not knowing it would be one they would never forget. The day ended without immediate incident, but the tension lingered in the air like a heavy fog. People filed out slowly, whispers filling the halls. Some spoke of the injustice Dalton had committed. Others spoke of the bravery and steadiness of Judge Freeman. All left knowing that the trial was far from over, and that tomorrow could bring events no one was prepared for. The story of what happened next would shock the court, the city, and the nation. But for now, the first part of this real-life drama had set the stage, leaving everyone on edge, waiting for the next chapter to unfold. The next morning, the courtroom was already filled with a restless crowd, reporters shuffling papers and spectators trying to find their seats. The tension from the previous day seemed to have settled into a quiet but heavy anticipation. Everyone sensed that today could bring something different, something unpredictable. The jurors entered, their faces serious, aware of the gravity of what they were witnessing. Judge Freeman took her seat with calm authority, her eyes scanning the room to make sure everything was in order. Officer Dalton appeared at the front, his presence more intense than the day before. He seemed to carry a storm inside him, and people could feel it in the way he shifted in his chair, tapping his pen on the table. The courtroom officers kept a careful watch, sensing that Dalton's behavior might escalate. No one spoke out loud about it, but the energy in the room was taut, as if everyone were holding their breath together. The prosecution began their day by presenting more evidence, focusing on the patterns of misconduct that had defined Dalton's career. Witnesses were called one after another, recounting incidents that showed his aggressive behavior and lack of judgment. Each story added to the weight of the case, making Dalton seem smaller, less controlled. The jury listened intently, some taking notes, others simply staring, absorbing every detail. Outside the courtroom, reporters and viewers across the city watched, some shaking their heads in disbelief at the extent of Dalton's actions. Dalton's defense tried to argue that he had followed protocol, that he had acted within the limits of his authority. They questioned witnesses, pointing out minor inconsistencies and suggesting that the events were misinterpreted. But the room seemed to hang on the prosecution's narrative. The evidence, the witnesses' emotions, and the undeniable facts painted a picture of a man who allowed bias to guide his decisions. As the morning passed, Dalton's demeanor grew more erratic. He muttered under his breath, occasionally glaring at the witnesses or the jury. His hands twitched, and at times he leaned forward as if ready to spring into action. The courtroom officers subtly shifted closer, their presence a quiet reminder that any sudden movement could be met with immediate intervention. Judge Freeman noticed all of this, her calm exterior masking a mind racing with contingency plans. She had seen anger before, but there was something darker in Dalton's eyes today. A witness, a young man who had experienced a similar encounter with Dalton, took the stand. He described the fear, confusion, and humiliation he had felt during the stop. His voice trembled at first, but he grew stronger as he recounted the details. The jury leaned forward, captivated by his courage. Dalton's expression hardened, his jaw tightening. It was clear he did not like hearing these accounts, and the tension in the room grew thicker. like a storm waiting to break. The court continued with more testimonies, each revealing more about Dalton's aggressive tendencies and the fear he inspired. Judge Freeman maintained order, guiding the proceedings with a firm but calm voice. She reminded everyone of the rules, ensuring the trial remained fair and focused. Yet even as she spoke, there was a subtle awareness in her eyes. She noticed Dalton's restless movements, the way his gaze lingered too long, the way he clenched and unclenched his fists. She sensed that the situation could escalate at any moment. By midday, the energy in the courtroom had shifted. The quiet tension had become almost electric. Dalton's agitation was palpable. He fidgeted in his seat, occasionally tapping on the table or adjusting his chair in a way that made the officers glance at him quickly. The jury watched closely, aware of the intensity but unsure what it meant. Witnesses became more nervous, feeling the charged atmosphere. Even the reporters paused, sensing that something unusual was about to happen. Judge Freeman asked a question about a technical detail in one of the reports. Dalton's response was sharp, defensive, almost explosive. The courtroom seemed to lean in, holding its collective breath. It was a small exchange, but it was enough to make people realize that Dalton's patience was wearing thin. The officers remained alert, ready to respond, their hands close to the tools of restraint and safety. Every person in the room felt the tension in a different way. Fear, curiosity, and anticipation mixed together into a palpable force. A brief recess was called, giving everyone a chance to step out and breathe. Dalton refused to leave his seat, his eyes never leaving Judge Freeman. His demeanor was rigid, a quiet storm brewing beneath the surface. The courtroom officers approached him carefully, ready to enforce the rules if necessary. Judge Freeman remained calm, watching, understanding that this moment could be crucial in preventing a disaster. The spectators whispered among themselves, sensing that this was not just an ordinary trial. When the proceedings resumed, the day took a sharp turn. Dalton's agitation increased, his movements more sudden, more pronounced. He leaned forward, speaking under his breath, and the officers moved subtly closer, their eyes trained on him. Judge Freeman asked another question, her voice steady, clear, and authoritative. She did not show fear, but she did show awareness. Her calmness was a counterbalance to Dalton's growing unrest, a quiet strength that held the room together. The prosecution presented another piece of evidence, a video showing Dalton's behavior during a previous incident. The footage was clear, showing aggression and lack of control. Dalton's face turned red, his hands clenched, and he muttered angrily to himself. The jury reacted. The witnesses flinched slightly, and even the officers exchanged quick glances. Judge Freeman did not react outwardly, but internally. She noted every detail, every twitch, every sign that Dalton might take action. Then it happened. In a moment of heightened tension, Dalton's hand moved beneath the table. For a brief instant, no one noticed except Judge Freeman. Her eyes caught the motion, subtle but unmistakable. The room seemed to slow down, as if time itself recognized the danger. Dalton's actions became a silent alarm, a test of readiness for every trained officer in the courtroom. Judge Freeman maintained her calm, yet internally, she assessed every possibility. She had faced crises before, but this was immediate, dangerous, and unpredictable. The officers were in motion, subtly positioning themselves to respond. The jury and spectators remained unaware, still focused on the trial, still thinking in terms of words and evidence rather than imminent danger. Dalton's agitation reached a peak, his hand hidden, the tension almost unbearable. Judge Freeman's mind was sharp, calculating, aware of every detail. Her calm voice continued to guide the proceedings, masking the storm that had quietly entered the room. Everyone felt the invisible charge in the air, though they did not yet understand what was about to happen. In this quiet, tense moment, the courtroom became a stage for a silent battle. Control against chaos, patience against impulsive rage. Judge Freeman's awareness and readiness were critical, and the officers' training would be tested. The day had shifted from a legal proceeding to a scene of human drama, where courage, calm, and quick thinking would soon define the outcome. The witnesses continued their testimonies, unaware of the danger creeping closer. Dalton's focus remained on Judge Freeman, his movements subtle but deliberate. Every eye in the courtroom watched him, some sensing the unusual intensity, others interpreting it as mere frustration. But Judge Freeman knew better. She had seen enough to recognize a situation that could become life-threatening in an instant. The anticipation was unbearable, the tension reaching a breaking point. The afternoon wore on, and the courtroom held its collective breath. Dalton's behavior had reached a level that could no longer be ignored. Judge Freeman remained a beacon of calm authority, her presence a stabilizing force. The officers stayed ready, silent, focused, their hands hovering near their tools of intervention. Every detail mattered, every second counted, and the stage was set for an event that would shock everyone present. As the session continued, Dalton made one small, subtle movement that no one else noticed but Judge Freeman. It was enough to make her recognize the imminent danger. Her training, experience, and calmness allowed her to act before the situation exploded. What followed in the next moments would change the courtroom forever. A moment of suspense and fear that no one would forget. The day's events had built to this critical point, and every person present was about to witness a real-life test of courage, control, and human resilience. The courtroom was silent, but the silence carried a weight that pressed down on everyone inside. The air felt thick, almost like it was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Officer Dalton shifted again in his seat, his movements sharper and more deliberate. Judge Freeman, sensing the tension, maintained her calm exterior. Her eyes locked on Dalton, her mind calculating, anticipating every possibility. Without warning, Dalton's hand moved quickly from beneath the table. The motion was sharp, sudden, and unmistakable to Judge Freeman, though the rest of the courtroom remained unaware. The panic that could have erupted spread only in her mind as she assessed the situation in a heartbeat. Her training, both legal and military, kicked in instantly. She knew she had to act with precision and calm to prevent disaster. Judge Freeman pressed the panic button discreetly under her desk, sending a silent alert to the security personnel stationed in and around the courtroom. She kept her voice steady and authoritative, addressing Dalton as if nothing unusual was happening. "Sir, please remain calm and keep your hands visible," she said firmly, her tone even, controlled, and commanding. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath, unaware of the silent drama unfolding in its midst. Dalton's expression hardened, his eyes locking onto hers, and for a tense second, the room seemed frozen in time. The officers who had been monitoring him immediately sprang into action, moving with trained precision. They approached Dalton carefully but quickly, ensuring that every step they took minimized the risk of a sudden escalation. The courtroom, still calm on the surface, was filled with a tension so thick that it could almost be felt physically. Judge Freeman continued to speak, keeping Dalton focused and trying to de-escalate the situation. Her calm voice, steady and unwavering, carried authority that cut through the rising chaos inside Dalton's mind. "This is your chance to do the right thing. No one will be harmed if you comply," she said, her eyes never leaving his. Her words were simple but powerful, a mixture of command and reassurance. She understood that fear and aggression could only be countered with calm and clarity. The security personnel closed in, their hands ready but careful, trained to take control without provoking a reaction. Dalton's body tensed as they approached, and for a moment it seemed he might resist. But Judge Freeman's continued presence, her calm authority, held him in check. Her mind was focused on each movement, each possibility, calculating the safest way to prevent harm. Then, in a split second, the officers managed to grab Dalton's arm and disarm him. The gun was removed from the situation before it could be used, and the courtroom collectively exhaled, though few fully realized what had just been prevented. Dalton struggled briefly, but the officers maintained control, restraining him and moving him to a secure area. The sudden eruption of action was controlled, precise, and prevented a tragedy that could have changed everyone's lives in that room. Judge Freeman, though composed, allowed herself a moment of relief. Her heart raced, adrenaline surged, but her demeanor remained calm to keep the courtroom under control. She immediately addressed the spectators and the jury, ensuring they remained seated and calm. "Everyone, please remain calm. The situation is under control," she said firmly. Her words reassured people, grounding the chaos that had threatened to erupt. Witnesses who had been testifying earlier were visibly shaken, some covering their mouths, others staring wide-eyed at Dalton being restrained. The jury members blinked in disbelief, processing what had just occurred. Some had noticed nothing until the officers acted, while others had caught glimpses of Dalton's sudden movement. The courtroom had narrowly avoided a disaster, and the impact of what had been prevented rippled through everyone present. Outside the courtroom, Reporters and viewers across the city had no idea what had almost happened. The story that would later spread was about more than a trial. It became a story of courage, quick thinking, and restraint under extreme pressure. Judge Freeman's actions, calm and precise, had prevented violence and preserved the integrity of the courtroom. Her composure was a shield, protecting everyone from the potential consequences of one man's anger and poor judgment. Dalton was taken away for additional charges, including the attempted threat in the courtroom. His behavior had escalated from verbal frustration to a serious physical threat, and the consequences were immediate. The officer's quick response, combined with Judge Freeman's awareness and calm, ensured that the law would respond appropriately and that no one was harmed. As the courtroom slowly returned to a sense of normalcy, Judge Freeman addressed the jury and spectators once more. Reinforcing the need to focus on the trial itself, she ensured that the process continued with order, emphasizing that justice would not be derailed by fear or intimidation. Her steady presence reminded everyone of the importance of resilience and professionalism, even in moments of extreme danger. The incident became a turning point in the trial. Dalton's attempt to create fear backfired completely, further highlighting the seriousness of his character and behavior. The jury observed how quickly and effectively the situation had been handled, noting both the danger and the courage displayed. The witnesses, though shaken, continued to provide their testimonies, supported by the calm and structured environment maintained by Judge Freeman. Throughout the remainder of the day, Judge Freeman continued to preside with her characteristic calm authority. She allowed the trial to proceed, ensuring that the focus remained on the facts, evidence, and justice. The courtroom's atmosphere remained tense but controlled, a reminder that even in the face of unexpected danger, order could prevail through calm skill and awareness. The city would later hear about the incident, lauding Judge Freeman for her bravery and composure. The story became a symbol of courage under pressure, demonstrating how training, awareness, and calm decision-making could prevent disaster. It also shone a light on the ongoing issues of misconduct and bias, reinforcing the need for accountability in positions of power. As the day concluded, Judge Freeman reflected quietly on the events, aware that her actions had prevented tragedy. She remained professional and composed, but inside, she knew the importance of vigilance and preparedness. The courtroom, though shaken, had experienced a real-life lesson in courage, control, and the human capacity to face danger with calm and determination. Part 3 of the trial had changed the course of events. What could have been a catastrophe was transformed into a demonstration of resilience and quick thinking. The day's proceedings continued with renewed focus, as everyone in the courtroom recognized the delicate balance between order and chaos, and the role of human awareness and courage in keeping that balance intact. The incident would be remembered, discussed and studied not for the fear it caused, but for the strength and clarity it revealed in the face of potential disaster. The events of the courtroom had left a mark that could not be ignored. The footage from the trial, combined with eyewitness accounts, quickly became a national story. News outlets covered the incident from every angle, highlighting both the danger that had been narrowly avoided and the calm, decisive actions of Judge Freeman. The city was abuzz with discussion, from everyday conversations to social media debates, as people reflected on what had happened and the larger issues it represented. Within hours, law enforcement agencies launched a thorough investigation into Dalton's actions, both during the trial and in his past career. Internal affairs officers examined reports, body cam footage, and complaints that had accumulated over the years. Every detail was scrutinized as investigators tried to understand the full scope of Dalton's behavior. It became clear that his conduct in the courtroom was not an isolated incident, but part of a pattern of aggression and poor judgment. The public's reaction was intense. Many were outraged, expressing disbelief that a law enforcement officer could bring a weapon into a courtroom, targeting a judge simply because of the color of their skin. Advocacy groups called for stricter oversight of police officers, better training, and reforms to prevent such incidents from happening again. People praised Judge Freeman's courage, noting that her ability to remain calm under extreme pressure likely prevented a tragedy. Dalton was held in custody under strict supervision, and prosecutors prepared additional charges for the attempt to threaten and endanger a judicial officer. His past record of misconduct became a critical part of the case. with lawyers and investigators working to ensure that every incident was accounted for. The narrative of the trial shifted dramatically, focusing not only on his original charges but also on the courtroom incident that revealed the depth of his volatility. Inside the courtroom, Judge Freeman continued to preside over the proceedings with her usual composure. She made it clear that the trial would not be derailed by fear or intimidation. Every day she faced the press with measured statements, emphasizing the importance of justice, fairness, and accountability. Her ability to maintain focus despite public scrutiny reinforced her reputation as a leader who could handle even the most challenging situations. Witnesses who had been present during the incident were interviewed again by investigators. Many described the fear they had felt, the rapid sequence of events, and the professionalism of the officers and Judge Freeman. Their accounts painted a vivid picture of how close the courtroom had come to disaster and how quick thinking and preparedness had prevented harm. These interviews were crucial in building the additional case against Dalton, highlighting the seriousness of his actions. As the investigation continued, city officials and law enforcement leaders began discussions about broader reforms. Courtroom security procedures were reviewed and updated, ensuring that no one could bring a weapon into such a space undetected. Training programs for officers were revised to include de-escalation techniques and situational awareness, using the incident as a real-life example of what could happen if protocols were not followed. The story of Dalton's attempt to create fear became a case study in preventing violence and maintaining safety in high-pressure environments. The community also responded with support. For the victims and for Judge Freeman, public forums were held, where people could express their concerns about racism, bias, and accountability within the police force. Many shared personal stories of encounters with law enforcement, highlighting a broader pattern of systemic issues. Judge Freeman participated in some of these discussions, emphasizing the importance of justice, transparency, and the responsibility of those in power to protect everyone equally. For the jurors, the incident had a profound impact. They had witnessed firsthand the volatility of Dalton's behavior, and it reinforced the evidence presented during the trial. Their deliberations became informed not only by the facts of the original case, but also by the understanding of the potential danger he posed. The courtroom experience had given them a unique perspective on the character and actions of the defendant, influencing their approach to justice. Prosecutors worked diligently to ensure that Dalton faced the full consequences of his actions. They compiled reports, interviewed witnesses, and presented the courtroom incident as part of the ongoing trial. The additional charges carried significant weight, demonstrating that attempts to intimidate or threaten a judge would not be tolerated. Legal experts across the nation commented on the case, noting how it highlighted the importance of vigilance, proper security, and accountability in law enforcement. Judge Freeman, meanwhile, continued her work with steady resolve. She understood that the attention, praise, and scrutiny could be overwhelming, but she remained focused on the principle that the law must be upheld without fear or favor. She met with court staff, officers, and legal teams to ensure that safety protocols were in place, that lessons were learned, and that the courtroom remained a space where justice could be administered fairly. The media coverage brought national attention to the issues of racism, bias, and misconduct in law enforcement. People across the country debated the incident, reflecting on the responsibility of officers and the importance of protecting those who uphold the law. Judge Freeman's actions became a symbol of courage and professionalism, inspiring conversations about how individuals can make a difference even in dangerous and high-pressure situations. As the investigation unfolded, it became clear that Dalton's attempt to threaten the judge was part of a larger problem within the police force. The attention led to reviews of other cases, disciplinary measures for officers who had previously acted inappropriately, and discussions about broader reforms to ensure accountability. The incident became more than a single story. It became a catalyst for change and reflection in law enforcement and the judicial system. The city slowly returned to a sense of routine, but the memory of that courtroom day lingered. People remembered the fear, the tension, and the courage displayed. Judge Freeman's leadership and composure served as a reminder that preparedness, calm, and quick thinking could prevent tragedy. The officers who acted swiftly were recognized for their professionalism, and the story of that day was shared as a lesson in vigilance and courage. Dalton remained in custody, facing a growing list of charges. His actions had consequences that could not be ignored, and the legal system moved to ensure accountability. The courtroom incident, combined with his history of misconduct, left no doubt about the severity of his behavior. The investigation and legal process highlighted the importance of fairness, justice, and the need to hold those in positions of power accountable. For the public, the story was both shocking and inspiring. It showed how quickly a situation could escalate, how dangerous bias and aggression could be, and how human courage and composure could prevent disaster. The discussion around the incident extended beyond the courtroom, into homes, workplaces, and community meetings. People reflected on the need for fairness, respect, and vigilance in everyday life, and the importance of standing up against misconduct. The day's events, and the investigation that followed, set the stage for the final chapters of the trial. Dalton's actions had changed the narrative, making it clear that justice required not only legal knowledge but also awareness, courage, and responsibility. Judge Freeman's example showed that one person could make a critical difference, maintaining order and protecting lives even in the most dangerous situations. In the end, Part 4 of this story focused on the aftermath, the investigation, and the response of both the legal system and the community. The events in the courtroom became a symbol of resilience, awareness, and the importance of accountability. As the trial moved toward its conclusion, the lessons of that day remained vivid, shaping how people thought about justice, courage, and the human capacity to act decisively in moments of crisis. The trial finally reached its conclusion after weeks of intense testimony, evidence presentation, and legal arguments. The courtroom was packed, but this time, the tension was mixed with a quiet sense of anticipation. The jurors had listened to everything, from the original case against Officer Dalton to the shocking courtroom incident that had occurred mid-trial. They had seen his volatility firsthand, and had understood the risk he posed not just to the public but to the very system of justice. The city waited with bated breath to learn the verdict. Judge Freeman took her place on the bench, her presence calm and resolute as always. She had navigated every challenge with precision, keeping the courtroom in order during some of the most tense moments anyone could remember. Today, her focus was on ensuring that justice would be served through the proper channels, emphasizing the integrity of the legal process. Her calmness reassured the jury and everyone present that the law, despite all the chaos, would hold firm. The prosecution summarized their case, highlighting the repeated misconduct by Dalton, the unnecessary use of force against innocent citizens, and the dangerous actions in the courtroom. They painted a clear picture of a man whose actions consistently displayed aggression, bias, and poor judgment. The courtroom felt heavy as they spoke, every word reinforcing the sense that Dalton had crossed a line that could not be ignored. The defense offered a final plea, asking the jury to consider Dalton's years of service and to focus only on specific events rather than a pattern of behavior. They tried to frame the courtroom incident as a moment of misunderstanding or misjudgment, but the impact of the incident was undeniable, and the jury seemed unmoved. They had witnessed a man act recklessly in the face of authority, and the evidence of his past actions reinforced the message that accountability was necessary. The jurors retired to deliberate, and the courtroom waited in silence. Each second felt stretched, the city's eyes metaphorically upon them, though only those inside knew the weight of the decision they were about to make. The tension was palpable, but there was also a sense that justice was being carefully considered. Judge Freeman remained composed, her calm demeanor a stabilizing force for the courtroom staff and spectators. Hours passed, and finally, the jury returned. The foreperson stood, clearing their throat before speaking. "We, the jury, find the defendant guilty on all counts," they announced. A wave of relief, emotion, and intensity swept through the courtroom. People exhaled, some whispered, and some even quietly cried. Dalton's face fell, the realization of accountability settling upon him. The decision was not just a legal victory. It was a moral acknowledgement that the law could protect those who were vulnerable. Dalton was immediately taken into custody to face sentencing. His actions during the trial added additional penalties, reinforcing the severity of what he had done. The courtroom officers, who had acted so decisively before, were acknowledged for their vigilance and professionalism. Judge Freeman allowed the proceedings to move forward efficiently, ensuring that every detail was documented, every procedural step followed, maintaining the integrity of the court throughout. The city outside reacted with a mixture of relief, reflection, and discussion. People spoke about accountability in law enforcement, the importance of courage, and the need to support those who uphold justice. Judge Freeman became a symbol of what could be achieved through composure, awareness, and moral clarity. Her actions, particularly during the courtroom incident, were celebrated and studied as examples of leadership under pressure. In the weeks that followed, Dalton's case became part of larger conversations about reform. Law enforcement agencies reviewed their protocols, particularly around courtroom security and officer conduct. Training programs were updated, emphasizing the need for de-escalation, situational awareness, and respect for the law. The courtroom incident was cited in seminars and workshops, highlighting the importance of preparation and courage in preventing potential disasters. Judge Freeman continued her work with a quiet dedication. She met with staff and security teams, reviewing lessons learned from the trial to make the courtroom even safer. She also engaged with community groups, speaking about justice, fairness, and the role of law in protecting society. Her reflections emphasized that courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to act responsibly despite fear, a lesson that resonated with many across the city. The witnesses who had been present during the trial and the courtroom incident reflected on their experiences. They spoke about the fear they had felt, the relief when the situation was controlled, and the importance of maintaining faith in justice. Their testimonies became part of the public record, reinforcing the human impact of Dalton's actions and the bravery required to prevent harm. It was a reminder that behind every trial, every verdict, there were people whose lives were touched and changed. Dalton's conviction sent a clear message. Misconduct, aggression, and attempts to intimidate the judicial system would not be tolerated. The legal system had held firm, demonstrating that no individual, regardless of position or power, was above the law. This message resonated not just in the courtroom but across the city, inspiring hope for a fairer, more accountable society. The community engaged in conversations about the larger issues at play. Forums, panels, and discussions focused on police accountability, systemic bias, and ways to ensure that justice served all members of society equally. Judge Freeman's actions were often cited as a benchmark for professionalism and courage. Her example illustrated how individual responsibility and integrity could influence outcomes far beyond the walls of a single courtroom. For those who had followed the trial closely, the outcome brought a sense of closure, though the lessons remained vivid. The story of the courtroom incident, coupled with Dalton's conviction, served as a reminder that vigilance, composure, and adherence to the law were essential to maintaining justice. People reflected on the courage it took to stand firm under threat and the importance of supporting systems that uphold fairness and accountability. Judge Freeman herself took quiet satisfaction in the outcome. She understood the responsibility she carried, and the decisions she made had prevented harm and ensured that justice prevailed. Yet she remained humble, focused not on personal recognition but on the principle that the law must protect everyone equally. Her reflections underscored a simple truth: courage, awareness, and calm action could make an extraordinary difference in moments of crisis. Dalton's story, now fully part of the public record, continued to be studied as an example of what can happen when power is abused and the law is challenged. The incident highlighted both the danger of unchecked authority